Imagine the person who tries to manipulate you suddenly losing control, not because you fought back, but because you did nothing at all. No anger, no explanation, just calm silence. And strangely, that silence becomes the most powerful move you have. Today, you'll discover 10 silent moves that instantly confuse toxic people, strategies that quietly flip the power dynamic without drama, without arguments, and without wasting your energy. Toxic people often depend on emotional reactions to maintain influence over others. When someone tries to provoke you, criticize you unfairly, or create unnecessary conflict, they are usually looking for a reaction. Anger, frustration, or even long explanations become the fuel that keeps their behavior alive. Controlled calmness quietly removes that fuel. Instead of reacting impulsively, you slow down your response and maintain a steady emotional presence. This does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending that their behavior does not affect you. It means choosing to remain composed rather than allowing another person to control your emotional state. When a toxic individual sees calmness where they expected chaos, their strategy begins to lose effectiveness. They may raise their voice, repeat accusations, or attempt to push harder in order to trigger a reaction. However, calmness creates a psychological barrier. Your relaxed tone, steady eye contact, and measured responses communicate that you are aware of what is happening, but you are not willing to participate in the emotional drama. This changes the power dynamic in subtle but powerful ways. Controlled calmness also helps you think more clearly. Emotional reactions often lead people to say things they regret later. Toxic personalities sometimes use these emotional outbursts as evidence to blame you or portray themselves as the victim. Remaining calm prevents them from using your own words against you. It keeps the focus on their behavior instead of allowing the situation to shift toward your reaction. Another important aspect of calmness is body language. Slow breathing, relaxed posture, and deliberate speech all signal confidence and self-control. These signals make it difficult for manipulative individuals to read emotional weaknesses that they might otherwise exploit. Calm behavior also discourages escalation because conflict usually requires two emotionally involved participants. Over time, consistently maintaining calmness changes how toxic people approach you. Many manipulators prefer targets who react strongly because those reactions give them control. When they repeatedly encounter someone who refuses to become emotionally reactive, they often begin to lose interest in provoking that person. This quiet stability becomes a form of psychological protection that strengthens your confidence while weakening the manipulative patterns toxic individuals rely on. Strategic silence is one of the most powerful yet underestimated ways to deal with toxic behavior. Many toxic individuals rely heavily on provoking conversations that spiral into arguments, emotional explanations, or defensive reactions. They often introduce comments designed to bait you, such as subtle insults, sarcastic remarks, or exaggerated accusations. Their goal is rarely to reach understanding. Instead, they want to trigger a response that allows them to control the direction of the interaction. Strategic silence disrupts that expectation because it removes the response they are counting on. When you choose silence in the right moments, you deny toxic people the emotional feedback they seek. Instead of immediately responding to a provocative statement, you pause and allow the comment to exist without reaction. This pause can feel uncomfortable at first because many people are conditioned to defend themselves or clarify misunderstandings quickly. However, silence changes the dynamic of the interaction. Without your response, the toxic individual is left alone with their own words, and the conversation loses the momentum they were trying to create. Strategic silence also prevents unnecessary escalation. Arguments often grow stronger when both sides contribute emotional energy. When one side stops feeding that energy, the intensity naturally weakens. Silence interrupts the cycle of accusation and defense, preventing the toxic person from turning the situation into a dramatic confrontation. In many cases, the lack of reaction makes their attempt at manipulation appear obvious, even to others observing the interaction. Another important aspect of silence is the control it gives you over your thoughts. Instead of reacting immediately, You create space to analyze the situation. You can observe tone, intention, and patterns in the other person's behavior. This awareness helps you decide whether a response is truly necessary or whether disengagement is the smarter option. Silence can also communicate boundaries without confrontation. When someone repeatedly makes disrespectful remarks and receives no engagement from you, they eventually recognize that those remarks will not produce the attention or conflict they expected. Over time, this teaches them that certain tactics simply do not work with you. Strategic silence therefore becomes a quiet form of strength, allowing you to maintain dignity and control without participating in emotional games. Short responses are a powerful way to protect yourself when dealing with toxic people because they reduce the amount of information available for manipulation. Toxic individuals often rely on long conversations, detailed explanations, and emotional reactions to twist words or create confusion. When someone explains too much, a manipulative person can pick apart small details, change the meaning of statements, or drag the conversation into endless arguments. Short responses prevent this by keeping communication simple, neutral, and controlled. When you respond briefly, you limit the space for toxic people to create drama. Instead of giving long defenses or emotional speeches, you answer with concise and calm statements. Words like, "Okay, I understand," "noted," or "that's your opinion" can quietly close a conversation without creating conflict. These types of responses do not provide the emotional energy that toxic personalities often seek. Because there is nothing dramatic to react to, their attempts to provoke you start losing momentum. Another benefit of short responses is that they help maintain clarity in communication. Toxic people sometimes ask questions not to understand, but to trap you in contradictions. They may ask the same question in different ways, hoping you will eventually say something they can use against you. When your responses remain short and consistent, it becomes harder for them to manipulate the conversation or twist your words into something negative. Short responses also signal emotional self-control. They show that you are not feeling pressured to explain every decision or defend every action. Confidence often appears through simplicity. When someone calmly gives a brief answer and refuses to be pulled into unnecessary debate, it communicates that they are comfortable with their choices and boundaries. In many situations, toxic individuals become frustrated when they receive minimal responses. They may attempt to provoke more aggressively or repeat their questions in different ways to force a longer reaction. However, when the pattern of brief responses continues, their strategy begins to weaken. The conversation stops revolving around their attempts to create conflict because you are no longer feeding the interaction with emotional explanations. Over time, this habit changes how toxic people interact with you. They begin to realize that long arguments and manipulative questioning will not produce the reaction they expect. By keeping your communication simple and controlled, you quietly protect your energy while preventing unnecessary drama from growing. Unpredictable availability is a subtle but powerful way to break the control that toxic people often try to establish. Many toxic individuals depend on consistent access to your time and attention. They assume they can call, message, complain, or create tension whenever they want, expecting you to respond immediately. Over time, this pattern trains you to react on their schedule rather than your own. When you become constantly available, they gain a sense of control over your emotional energy and daily routine. Changing that pattern quietly shifts the balance of power. When your availability becomes less predictable, toxic people can no longer rely on immediate reactions. Instead of answering every call, responding to every message right away, or engaging in every conversation they initiate, you begin choosing when and how you interact. This does not require dramatic announcements or confrontations. It simply involves being more selective with your time and attention. Sometimes you respond later, sometimes you keep your answers short, and sometimes you do not engage at all if the interaction seems unnecessary or emotionally draining. This unpredictability disrupts the expectations that toxic individuals rely on. They often follow behavioral patterns where they provoke, complain, or manipulate at specific moments because they know you will respond. When your responses become less predictable, their strategy loses its structure. They cannot easily plan how to trigger reactions or draw you into drama because they are no longer sure when you will engage. Another important aspect of unpredictable availability is the message it sends about self-respect. By choosing when to respond, you demonstrate that your time and mental space have value. Toxic people often push boundaries to see how much control they can gain over someone's schedule or attention. When they notice that you are not always accessible, they begin to understand that you are not willing to prioritize their negativity over your own well-being. Unpredictable availability also gives you more room to focus on healthier parts of your life. Instead of being constantly pulled into tense conversations or emotional manipulation, you can invest your energy in productive work, supportive relationships, and personal growth. This shift weakens the influence toxic people have over your mood and mindset. Over time, many toxic individuals reduce their attempts to control you because the pattern they relied on no longer functions the way it once did. Observing instead of reacting is a powerful shift that changes how you experience toxic behavior. Many people automatically react the moment they feel criticized, disrespected, or manipulated. This reaction is natural because the brain is wired to defend itself when it senses a threat. However, toxic individuals often rely on this instinctive reaction to maintain control. When someone reacts emotionally, the toxic person gains the ability to steer the conversation, escalate conflict, or portray themselves as the victim. Choosing observation instead of immediate reaction interrupts that process. When you step back and observe, you begin to notice patterns that would normally be hidden by emotional tension. Toxic people rarely behave randomly. They often repeat the same strategies over and over again. For example, they might criticize when they feel insecure, create drama when attention shifts away from them, or twist conversations when they want to avoid responsibility. By observing these patterns calmly, you gain insight into their behavior rather than becoming trapped in it. Observation also helps you separate facts from emotional manipulation. Toxic individuals sometimes exaggerate situations or create false narratives to provoke reactions. When you pause and simply watch the interaction unfold, you give yourself time to analyze what is actually happening. Instead of responding to the emotional tone of their words, you start paying attention to intentions, contradictions, and repeated tactics. Another important benefit of observation is emotional distance. Reacting immediately often pulls you into the same emotional state as the toxic person. Their anger, frustration, or negativity can spread quickly when both people are reacting at the same intensity. Observing creates a mental boundary that protects your emotional balance. You remain aware of the situation without allowing it to control your mood or decisions. Observation also strengthens your ability to respond strategically. Once you recognize behavioral patterns, you can predict how certain conversations will unfold. This awareness makes it easier to decide whether to respond calmly, set a boundary, or disengage completely. Instead of being surprised by toxic behavior, you begin to expect it and prepare for it.